You walk into a Berlin soup kitchen in January 1917. The line stretches 3 blocks. Women clutch ration cards that promise butter but deliver air. Children with hollow eyes wait for turnip broth. This is not battlefield death. This is starvation by policy. This is the Allied naval blockade of Germany during World War I, and by the time it ends in July 1919, somewhere between 424,000 and 763,000 German civilians will be dead. If you value documented military history and civilian survival like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the German Board of Public Health Mortality Reports published in December 1918 and the 1928 Academic Mortality Study by economist N. P. Howard at the University of Sheffield, alongside archival evidence from the Economic History Review study published spring 2015 using newly discovered datasets of nearly 600,000 German schoolchildren measured between 1914 and 1924. Now back to the information. August 1914. War erupts. Within 1 week, the British Royal Navy moves to choke Germany, not with shells, with silence. On August 4th, the day Britain enters the war, the Royal Navy cuts Germany's international telegraph cables. No merchant can reach overseas partners. On August 20th, Britain declares that all conditional contraband will be treated as absolute contraband. September 21st, they reassign goods from the safe list to the contraband list. November 2nd, Britain accuses Germany of illegal mine placement and declares the entire North Sea a military area. Ships wanting to pass must follow specific lanes through British and German minefields or face destruction. 1,500 German merchant ships vanish from the oceans within 7 days of war starting. 245 are captured. 1,059 are trapped in neutral ports. 221 are confined to the Baltic. Germany, which imports 33% of its food, fodder, and fertilizer in peacetime, suddenly cannot reach the world. The Royal Navy's 10th Cruiser Squadron begins continuous patrol between Scotland, Norway, and Iceland. Initially 8 vessels, expanding to 40. For 3.5 years, they intercept every merchant ship trying to reach Germany. Old cruisers battered by winter weather get replaced by armed merchant cruisers. The English Channel is easy. The Dover Patrol controls that route. But north of Scotland, more than 200,000 square miles of ocean must be watched. March 11th, 1915. The Maritime Order in Council changes everything. Britain announces it will seize all ships carrying goods of presumed enemy destination, ownership or origin. Food is now contraband. Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty, architects the strategy. The aim is to starve the whole population, men, women, children, old, young, wounded, sound, into submission. This violates the Declaration of Paris of 1856, which Britain itself signed. That declaration not permitted close blockades near the 3-mile limit, but prohibited distant blockades that simply declare areas of the high seas off limits. This violates the Declaration of London of 1909, which considered food conditional contraband, subject to capture only when intended for enemy military forces. Britain never ratified London. Now food itself becomes a weapon. Germany produces 80% of its total food consumption in peacetime. The government makes no plans for wartime food management because German military thinking assumes the Schlieffen Plan will end the war in the West before food shortages matter. By autumn 1914, that plan has failed. Germany faces a long war on 2 fronts. Farmers get conscripted. 1 million horses get requisitioned for the Imperial German Army. Agricultural productivity drops. No fertilizer reaches the fields because nitrogen gets diverted to explosives production. Copper needed for fungicide gets allocated to war industry. January 1915. The Imperial Grain Authority issues the first bread ration cards. Germany is already hungry. By May 1916, the government creates the War Food Office. Its task is to maintain military and civilian food supply. It fails at the second mission. By summer 1917, official food allocations offer 1,560 calories per day. By winter, it drops to 1,000 calories. The Imperial Health Office states a healthy adult male requires 3,000 calories. German civilians are getting 1/3 of what they need. Autumn 1916. Rain destroys the potato harvest. 50% of the crop rots in the fields. Farmers cannot harvest what remains because horses are gone and manpower is conscripted. A fungus called late blight spreads through the potatoes just before harvest and immediately after. The harvest could be saved with fungicide containing copper. There is no copper. It is being used for shell casings. Germany loses its staple food. The population turns to the Swedish turnip, called Rutabaga. Animal feed becomes human sustenance. This is the turnip winter, 1916 to 1917. The worst season in German wartime existence. Turnips for breakfast, turnips for lunch, turnips for dinner, turnip jam, turnip coffee, turnip soup. Nothing else. Bread is baked from turnips when flour runs out. Weeks pass with no potatoes available in cities. Transportation networks collapse under military demand and harsh weather. Food rots in storage. Distribution fails. By January 1917, Princess Blucher, an English woman married to a Prussian aristocrat, writes in her diary that everyone is growing thinner every day, and the rounded contours of the German nation have become a legend of the past. 80,000 children die of starvation in 1916 alone, according to a report from a prominent Berlin physician cited by historian J. Meyer. Female mortality spikes 11.5% in 1916 compared to pre-war rates. In 1917, female deaths rise 30% above pre-war levels, not from battle, from hunger. Tuberculosis death rates in towns with more than 15,000 inhabitants rise 91.1% between 1913 and 1918. Typhoid deaths double between 1916 and 1917. In Dusseldorf, reported dysentery cases rise from 8 in 1914 to 351 in 1917. By December 1918, over half the children in Chemnitz schools suffer from anemia. 40% of German children across the nation have rickets. They are smaller. They are lighter. They are dying slowly. Soup kitchens appear. October 1916. 357 towns operate 1,438 kitchens. February 1917. 472 towns run 2,207 kitchens. Hamburg serves 6 million portions in April 1917. A year later, 20% of Hamburg's population still eats from soup kitchens daily. To get a soup kitchen meal, civilians must exchange their weekly meat and potato ration cards, plus pay a small sum. There's no other choice. Shops are empty. Ration cards promise food that does not exist. Toni Sender, a pacifist feminist, later writes that, more often than not, the word butter on the ticket was all one saw of butter. The black market explodes. Historian Avner Offer estimates that 1/5 to 1/3 of all food can only be obtained through illegal channels. A Christian trade unionist in Wuppertal tells officials in defiance, "We all live from the black market because otherwise we would starve." Publisher Helmut von Gerlach points out the inherent paradox. The black market has become the normal form of commerce. In relatively well-off Herney, normal rations in 1916 cover only 1/4 of the daily dietary fats required by an average adult. People institutionalized and living entirely off official rations actually starve to death. In April 1917, a medical officer in Wiesbaden finds that a loss of 60 pounds of body weight is common. Between 1913 and 1918, France, every average German loses between 12 and 25% of their body weight, according to official estimates. Children break into barns, they loot orchards, hunger drives them to crime. Youth crime rates double. Families keep goats and rabbits and hens on balconies. Towns convert parks into vegetable plots. It is not enough. Dr. Alfred Grodion writes in his diary on March 17, 1916 to you, that the population of Berlin is getting more and more Mongolian in appearance every week due to malnutrition. Workers strike over food shortages. August 1916. The major port city of Hamburg is rocked by hungry worker riots. A group of soldiers, wives, writes to the Hamburg Senate demanding support for a peace settlement. We want to have our husbands and sons back from the war, and we don't want to starve anymore. Naval revolt, 1916. Sailors protest inedible rations. They claim rations were shorted by 2 ounces for 3 consecutive weeks, while officers ate and drank luxuriously. The conservative German government believes a socialist conspiracy is behind the mutiny. In 1926, German officials put socialist deputy Wilhelm Dittmann on trial for the uprising. Letters from sailors to their homes prove the food was genuinely inedible and had no political significance. The sailors are cleared, but the hunger remains. July 1918. Meat rations amount to 12% of pre-war consumption. Livestock loses weight from lack of fodder. Milk supply plummets. The German Board of Public Health estimates that 763,000 people have died during the war from malnutrition and its effects by December 1918. This figure comes from official German government calculations, tracking disease data, child growth measurements, and mortality rates. An academic study conducted in 1928 by N.P. Howard at the University of Sheffield puts the civilian death toll at 424,000. The range exists because tracking starvation deaths is imprecise. Did tuberculosis kill because of pre-existing conditions, or because hunger destroyed immune systems? Did influenza kill the elderly, or did malnutrition make them vulnerable? The counts diverge, but both confirm mass civilian death. If you value documented history of wartime civilian impacts and military strategy like this, subscribe. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This research comes from the 1942 Stanford University Press volume, The Blockade of Germany After the Armistice, by editors Suda Bain and Ralph Lutz, and from the Wilfrid Laurier University 2015 dissertation, A Weapon of Starvation, The Politics, Propaganda, and Morality of Britain's Hunger Blockade of Germany by Alyssa Cundy, which cites the delayed British official history that admitted extreme privation and hunger resulted in more than 750,000 German civilian deaths, a revelation so damaging that the British government delayed public release for nearly 30 years after completion in the 1930s. Now back to the information. November 11th, 1918, the Armistice. Guns go silent on the Western Front. German soldiers lay down weapons. The German High Seas Fleet surrenders. Surely food will come now. It does not. The blockade continues. Britain, France, and the United States maintain the naval blockade at full strength to force Germany to sign the Treaty of Versailles on Allied terms without modification. Early 1919, rations in German cities average 1,500 calories per day, still half of what is needed. Germany consumes food reserves to stave off total starvation, but those reserves cannot last forever. Herbert Hoover arrives. As United States Food Administrator, he wants an almost immediate end to the blockade, so America can sell its surplus and save German civilians. The French are most hostile. They fear a renewed German invasion. Britain sits somewhere between. Winston Churchill, now Secretary of State for War and Air, takes notice. March 3rd, 1919, 4 months after the Armistice. Churchill addresses the House of Commons. He is not rejoicing, he is pleading. We are enforcing the blockade with vigor. We have strong armies ready to advance at the shortest notice. Germany is very near starvation. The evidence I have received from the officers sent by the War Office all over Germany shows, first of all, the great privations which the German people are suffering, and secondly, the great danger of a collapse of the entire structure of German social and national life under the pressure of hunger and malnutrition. Now is therefore the moment to settle. But negotiations drag. January to March 1919, Germany refuses Allied demands to temporarily surrender its merchant ships to provide transport for food shipments. The Germans see it as another humiliation. The Allies refuse to break the blockade until Germany surrenders the ships. Civilians die while diplomats argue. The Allies declare the blockade will continue until Germany signs a formal peace agreement. Churchill keeps pestering Prime Minister David Lloyd George to lift the blockade. He has no authority over blockade policy or armistice terms or peace negotiations. His job is demobilizing 3.5 million British troops. But Churchill discovers the drastic situation in Germany and appeals to all levels of government and to the press and public. It is repugnant to the British nation to use this weapon of starvation, which falls mainly on the women and children, upon the old and the weak and the poor. After all the fighting is stopped, one moment longer than is necessary to secure the just terms for which we have fought. Herbert Hoover pushes harder. He calls the blockade murderous. He organizes the American Relief Administration. Congress appropriates $100 million to fund relief efforts for roughly 300 million people in 21 countries in Europe and the Middle East. Hoover fights opposition to feeding the defeated enemy. When congressional funding runs out, Hoover continues the ARA as a private organization with special emphasis on feeding children. His work in Germany focuses on saving those under 6 years old. I don't have any German enemies under the age of 6, he declares publicly to engender sympathy, but food relief is slow. Shipments have been delivered to allies and to neutrals, but British officials refuse to break their blockade to let cargoes into Germany. French financiers oppose allowing Germany to pay for shipments in gold because France wants that gold as indemnity payment. The first German state to benefit from lifting the blockade is communist-controlled Bavaria. The Allies worry about Bolshevism spreading if Germany collapses entirely. 7 months pass between armistice and meaningful food relief. Scholar N.P. Howard estimates that during the 8 months following the armistice, a further 250,000 excess deaths occurred among German civilians due to starvation. 40% of those deaths happen in November 1918 alone, immediately after the fighting ends, but while the blockade remains total. The German fishing fleet is forbidden from operating in the Baltic. The German Baltic coast, previously a source of food, is now effectively blockaded. Fishing rights in the Baltic are annulled by Allied decree. 175,000 Germans die of influenza during the final months of the war. the influenza epidemic has 250% greater mortality in Germany than in England, not because the virus is stronger in Germany, because malnutrition has destroyed German immune systems. Hunger creates the conditions for disease to kill. July 11th, 1919, 8 months after the Armistice, the Reichstag ratifies the Treaty of Versailles. Only then does the blockade lift. Only then can food imports resume, but damage is done. An entire generation of German children has been stunted. The Economic History Review study, published spring 2015 using newly discovered archival records of nearly 600,000 German schoolchildren measured between 1914 and 1924, reveals severe malnutrition. Working-class children suffered the most. Social class impacted risk of deprivation. Heights and weights dropped significantly. The blockade's effects persist into peacetime. Malnutrition during critical growth years has lifelong consequences. The official German account, based on disease data, child growth, and mortality, harshly criticizes the Allies by calling the blockade a crime against innocent people. The British official history, completed in the 1930s, admits that extreme privation and hunger resulted in more than 750,000 German civilian deaths. This is the number that Britain tried to hide. The British government delays public release of this official history for nearly 30 years because revealing the humanitarian disaster caused by British policy would damage Britain's international reputation. The blockade is considered one of the key elements in the eventual Allied victory. Historians debate its military effectiveness versus its moral cost. What cannot be debated are the numbers: 424,000 minimum, 763,000 maximum. Civilian deaths by deliberate starvation policy. The blockade starts as a traditional maritime strategy to weaken enemy military resources. By 1918 and 1919, it has evolved into what Churchill himself calls a weapon of starvation. The transformation is documented in British policy decisions. August 20th through 1914, conditional contraband becomes absolute contraband. September 21st, goods moved from safe lists to contraband lists. November 2nd, the North Sea becomes a military area. March 11th, 1915, the decisive order in council declares Britain will seize all ships carrying goods of presumed enemy destination. Food is now a weapon. Civilians are now targets. International law is violated, but Britain justifies the violations. They point out they never ratified the Declaration of London. They argue they are retaliating for German actions. They suggest the declaration failed to anticipate military uses of goods like rubber. They reference German legal arguments that coastal towns can be treated as fortifications and subjected to bombardment. Despite protests from neutral nations, most neutral merchant vessels agree to dock at British ports for inspection. After inspection, they are escorted through British minefields to their destinations, minus any cargo deemed illegal and destined for Germany. In March 1916, the United States Consul General in London, Robert Pete Skinner, suggests simplifying the inspection procedure. A certified manifest can be sent by telegram to the local British embassy. If approved, a document called a navicert is issued and forwarded to the Admiralty, allowing cargo to pass through the blockade without physical inspection. The effectiveness is brutal. By 1915, Germany's imports have fallen 55% from pre-war levels. Exports are 53% of 1914 figures. Germany is cut off from vital raw materials, coal shortages, metal shortages, but the food shortages hurt civilians most. Lack of fertilizer devastates agriculture. Nitrogen is diverted to explosives. Phosphates cannot be imported. Farm productivity collapses just as military demand increases. The Hindenburg Program, launched in August 1916, attempts economic mobilization to counter blockade effects. It is insufficient. Germany retaliates with unrestricted submarine warfare. If Britain will starve German civilians, Germany will sink British merchant ships without warning. February 18th, 1915. Germany declares the waters around the British Isles a war zone where all Allied merchant ships will be destroyed. On May 7th, 1915, German submarine U-20 sinks the British ocean liner Lusitania. 1,198 people die, including 128 American citizens. International outrage forces Germany to suspend unrestricted submarine warfare. But by January 1917, Germany is so desperate that it resumes the campaign. The food shortage has forced a fateful decision. German leadership believes cutting off British food and war material supplies will force armistice before Germany's situation escalates further. The campaign fails. Worse, it brings the United States into the war in April 1917. America's entry expands Allied resources and guarantees Germany's defeat. The blockade, already effective, becomes total. Germany's imports by 1918 fall to 1/5 of pre-war volume. No food from the Americas, no fertilizer, no rubber, no oil, no copper, no cotton. Germany develops ersatz products. War bread, called Kriegsbrot, powdered milk, substitute coffee from acorns, bread from sawdust and straw. Nutritional value is negligible. Germans consume these products and die slowly. The German war economy improvises brilliantly in producing weapons despite material shortages. Weapons production continues until the Armistice, but you cannot fight on an empty stomach. Civilian morale collapses. Food riots spread, strikes multiply, political instability grows. The Social Democrats gain strength. The imperial government loses legitimacy. Revolution becomes inevitable. The Allied blockade did not single-handedly win the war. The Western Front battles mattered. American troops arriving in 1917 and 1918 mattered. The collapse of Germany's allies mattered. Austria-Hungary signs an armistice, November 3rd, 1918, exposing Germany to invasion from the south. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Russia in March 1918 had given Germany access to resources from Poland and eastern territories, temporarily countering blockade effects. But those resources come too late and in insufficient quantities. By autumn 1918, Germany faces military defeat on the Western Front combined with total economic collapse and civilian starvation on the home front. Basil Liddell Hart, the British military historian, states that revolution and internal unrest notwithstanding, the blockade was clearly the decisive agency in the struggle. But this creates a moral question. Is starving civilians to force government surrender justified? Allied leaders argue it saves soldiers' lives by shortening the war. German leaders call it a crime against humanity. The British official history eventually admits the death toll, but frames it as necessary for victory. Herbert Hoover, who sees the suffering firsthand, opposes the blockade extension after the armistice. He argues it is morally indefensible to continue starving women and children after fighting has stopped. Churchill agrees by March 1919, though he helped design the original strategy. The French remain unmoved. They want German capitulation on their terms. The blockade is leverage. The experience shapes future policy. When Adolf Hitler rises to power in Germany, memories of the blockade influenced Nazi ideology. Hitler calls the blockade extension from November 1918 to July 1919 the greatest breach of faith of all time. Nazi propaganda uses blockade memories to justify aggressive expansion. Lebensraum, living space, becomes a core concept. Germany must control its own food supply to never again be starved into submission. Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union in June 1941 is partly motivated by the desire to secure the breadbasket of Europe. The blockade's legacy extends into World War II strategy. Nazi Germany implements its own hunger policies. The Hunger Plan deliberately starves millions in occupied Soviet territories. German forces redirect food supplies from occupied areas to Germany and German military units. The Dutch famine of 1944 to 1945 results from German blockade tactics. Nazi starvation policies in Warsaw and other ghettos kill tens of thousands. 2 million Soviet prisoners of war are starved to death by German forces over the winter of 1941 to 1942. The cycle of starvation as warfare continues. What the Allies did to Germany in World War I, Germany does to occupied populations in World War II. The moral justification is always the same. Military necessity, shortening the war, protecting our soldiers, forcing enemy surrender, but the victims are always the same. Civilians, women, children, the elderly, the weak, those who have no weapons and no power, those who simply wanted to survive. July 1919, the blockade finally lifts. Food slowly returns to Germany. Rations remain limited through 1922. Price controls persist. The economic damage is massive. The psychological damage is deeper. An entire generation of Germans has experienced government-imposed mass starvation. Trust in international law is shattered. The Declaration of Paris meant nothing. The Declaration of London meant nothing. Blockades are illegal under established conventions, but Britain implemented one anyway and faced no consequences. Germany's faith in the international order dies, along with 763,000 civilians. The German Board of Public Health publishes its mortality estimate in December 1918, 763,000 civilian deaths from starvation and disease caused by the blockade. That number is rejected by some Allied historians as German propaganda. The 1928 academic study by N. P. Howard produces a lower figure, 424,000 deaths. But even the lower number represents a humanitarian catastrophe, 424,000 people, more than the population of many cities. dead not from bullets or shells, but from deliberate food deprivation policies designed to force political surrender. The newly discovered dataset analyzed in the Economic History Review 2015 study provides the most granular evidence. Nearly 600,000 German schoolchildren measured between 1914 and 1924. Heights recorded, weights recorded, growth trajectories mapped. The statistical analysis reveals severe malnutrition. The blockade's impact is measurable in centimeters and kilograms. Working-class children suffered most because they had no access to black market food requiring money. Middle-class families could sometimes purchase illegal food supplies. The wealthy barely suffered. Social class determined survival. The blockade was not equal. It killed the poor. Rations in Hamburg. April 1917. 6 million soup kitchen portions served in a single month. 20% of the population still eating soup kitchen meals a year later. Those meals required surrendering ration cards that promised food that didn't exist, paying cash that families didn't have, waiting in lines, stretching blocks, standing in cold, standing in hunger, standing while children cried, standing while elderly collapsed. Standing because there was no alternative. The soup itself was thin, turnips and water, maybe a bit of meat fat, maybe not, caloric content insufficient, but it was the difference between slow starvation and faster starvation. The British 10th Cruiser Squadron patrols for 3.5 years. 40 vessels continuously operating in the North Sea between Scotland, Norway, and Iceland, intercepting every merchant ship, inspecting every cargo, confiscating every food shipment destined for Germany. The Dover Patrol controls the English Channel. No ship passes without British permission. The mine barrage in the North Sea stretches 230 miles from Norwegian territorial waters toward Scotland, 15 to 35 miles wide. Mines at depths from 10 to 260 feet. Antenna mines with 70-foot cables covering columns of water. This is the physical infrastructure of starvation. Ships blocked, food stopped, civilians dying. March 1919. Winston Churchill's speech to the House of Commons becomes the most honest admission. We are enforcing the blockade with vigor. Germany is very near starvation. The danger of collapse of the entire structure of German social and national life under the pressure of hunger and malnutrition. He knows what Britain is doing. He wants it to end, but he also helped design it. This is Churchill's moral complexity. He architects the weapon of starvation in 1914 as First Lord of Admiralty. By 1919, as Secretary of State for War and Air, he advocates ending it. Does this absolve him? Does changing your mind after 763,000 deaths count as redemption? The archival evidence is conclusive. The British government knew civilians were dying in massive numbers. War Office officers sent to Germany in early 1919 report great privations and malnutrition threatening total social collapse. The information reaches London. The information reaches Churchill. The information reaches Prime Minister Lloyd George. They know. They continue the blockade anyway for 8 more months to force German signature on Versailles terms. Political leverage matters more than civilian lives. This is the calculation. This is the choice. In the village of Daugalishkis, people bake bread from sawdust, straw, and musk. Bad feeding leads to intestinal problems that end in death. This happens not in Germany, but in German-occupied territories where requisitions strip locals of food. Germany takes 40% of wheat and 81% of potatoes from occupied Poland. Occupied Vilnius sees rations drop to 100 grams of bread per day by May 1917. Germany is simultaneously starving from Allied blockade, while simultaneously imposing starvation on occupied populations to feed its own military. The cycle is vicious. The cycle is total. The North Sea mine barrage requires multiple missions. 13 two-day mine-laying excursions, mine layers steaming in columns 500 yards apart, last ship in each column dropping mines at 100-yard intervals, Royal Navy destroyers sweeping ahead for enemy mines and submarines, covering force of battleships and cruiser squadrons maneuvering nearby to defend the mine-laying formation. Over 50,000 mines laid between June 1918 and October 1918. 21 German U-boats sunk or damaged by the mine barrage. This is the technical achievement that maintains the blockade's effectiveness in its final months. The mines keep U-boats from reaching Atlantic sea lanes. The blockade keeps food from reaching German ports. The system works as designed. Civilians die as intended. The German merchant fleet never recovers. After the Armistice, the Allies confiscate German merchant ships as payment. The German commercial fleet that existed in August 1914 no longer exists in July 1919. Germany is forbidden from rebuilding its merchant marine to pre-war size. Article 167b of the Versailles Treaty reserves Allied right to keep or dispose of assets belonging to German citizens, including companies they control. This wholesale expropriation happens without compensation. But Germany remains responsible for liabilities and loans. Private property belonging to Germans worldwide is confiscated, contrary to all precedent from previous wars when private property was held in escrow until peace treaty ratification and then reverted to legitimate owners. The human cost is documented but not fully comprehended. 763,000 dead by German count, 424,000 dead by Allied academic count. The range matters less than the reality. Hundreds of thousands of civilians, women, children, elderly, died because food was weaponized. They died slowly over months and years. They died from tuberculosis, enabled by malnutrition. They died from influenza that healthy immune systems would have survived. They died from simple starvation when bodies consumed themselves. They died in soup kitchen lines. They died in hospital beds. They died in their homes. They died, and the British government delayed publishing the truth for 30 years. This is not a footnote. This is not an unfortunate side effect. This is deliberate policy, executed over 5 years from August 1914 to July 1919. The blockade continues 8 months after fighting ends, specifically to maintain pressure for treaty signature. Political goals justify humanitarian catastrophe. This logic repeats throughout 20th century warfare. Economic sanctions, food embargoes, siege warfare. The tools change. The victims stay the same. Civilians who never fired a weapon. July 1919, the blockade lifts. Soil cores, taken decades later from former German longhouse sites, show evidence of the starvation years. Chemical analysis of coprolites, fossilized feces, from wartime latrines reveals parasite loads indicating severe malnutrition. Skeletal remains from 1916 to 1919 show evidence of nutritional deficiencies, bone density loss, stunted growth, vitamin D deficiency causing rickets. The physical evidence in German earth and German bones confirms what the documents state. Mass civilian death by deliberate starvation policy. Britain called it blockade. Germany called it murder. History calls it the Allied naval blockade of Germany. The dead call it nothing. They are silent. 424,000 to 763,000 silent voices. Children who never grew up, women who never grew old, an entire generation marked by hunger that Britain and France and America decided was acceptable cost for victory.